Hello, everyone. Dear fans of Manhwa, I hope you're having an amazing day. Before we begin, I want to give a very special shout out to everyone who left their comments on the previous video. I also want to express my deepest gratitude to the new followers who have joined the channel. And finally, a very special shout out to Salika Chin, who left the first comment on the previous video. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this incredible recap. We begin this story when the system informed our protagonist that he had a mission to hold a mass with the heroine before time ran out. He had a maximum of 2 hours, and although it seemed absurd, he was nervous, especially because his life was now on the line. The blonde girl in front of him, named Lee Jung, who assumed the role of the heroine, asked if something was wrong. Beside her, Rachel No, who also had the role of a heroine, showed interest in knowing if he had something to say to them. Willie Park, our protagonist in this world, was just an extra character. With some nervousness, he responded to both that it was nothing. One of the guys, intrigued, asked if he was going to stand them up since they planned to keep drinking later and wanted him to join them. Willie wasn't sure whether to accept, especially because Hero Kin, the male lead, appeared in his mind. Although Hero's attitude and glances worried him, Willie took advantage of a moment when Hero was distracted talking to the girls to check his mission. The system warned him that failure would result in him being erased from the story, which made his heart race. He had no idea how he had ended up in this situation, now trapped in a Christian comic with no way to escape. Determined to complete the mass, we flash back to when our protagonist was an ordinary 20-year-old immersed in an excellent webtoon, with a plot unlike anything he had seen in a long time. At that moment, he was crossing the street while reading, having the brilliant idea of writing a review. It would be his first, and he hoped it would be high quality. Just then, he received a message from Han, who mentioned they hadn't seen each other in a while and asked if they could call him. This confused him a little, but his life changed abruptly when Seon-kun crossed his path, and all that followed was a loud crash. The story of our protagonist seemed to have come to an end, but suddenly he began to feel dizzy, or rather, he regained consciousness. Upon opening his eyes, he realized he was fine without understanding how he had survived. The truck driver yelled at him to get out of the way, to which the young man quickly apologized. Upon reaching the other side, he tried to process what had happened. He was sure he had died. Moreover, he noticed he wasn't wearing glasses, yet he could still see perfectly. His body also felt strange, as if it wasn't his. He decided to look at himself through the phone's camera, and upon activating it, he was stunned. He couldn't understand how his face had changed. Cursing, he wondered who this plain-looking person he had become was. Because he said it out loud, people around him stared at him. He cursed himself for speaking so loudly, put the phone away, and got out of there as quickly as possible. However, he stopped further ahead, trying to absorb everything that was happening. He reviewed what he remembered. He was a 20-something unemployed guy with glasses whose routine revolved around reading webtoons and playing video games at home. His obsession with webtoons had led him to want to write reviews, and he was in the middle of one for his new favorite series. But now he realized he was in some kind of time travel, spiritual possession, or reincarnation scenario, the typical webtoon cliché. Although he noticed that since there were cars and cell phones in this world, it wasn't exactly a fantasy story. Luckily for him, it didn't seem like he had to fear for his life. Although he couldn't be entirely sure, given the modern fantasy genre, there was a possibility that monsters might emerge from portals, and he'd have to become a hunter. The memory of the indescribable pain he'd felt upon seeing Truck-kun was still fresh, and he wondered if he'd face a horrible end at the hands of such a monster. He really didn't want to experience such excruciating suffering again. Even so, curiosity led him to try something. Looking around to ensure no one was watching, he said, "Open status panel," hoping it would appear like in most webtoons. However, nothing happened, and he wondered if that kind of ability didn't exist in this world. Still doubting what kind of story he was in, he thought it might be a modern fantasy series, meaning he needed to prepare before monsters began to appear. He didn't understand why he was so calm in a situation like this, but when he opened his eyes again, he noticed a status panel had appeared before him. He didn't give it much thought since he had seen it countless times in webtoons, though seeing it in person was somewhat fascinating. A system window indicated that his status was stable. Our protagonist doubted whether it truly reflected the character's state, or if there was more to it. Looking closer, he noticed his name was now Willie Park, a name he found pathetic. He was 20 years old, which cheered him up slightly. At least he was a bit younger than before, but he worried that his stats might decrease, especially when a thought started forming in the corner of his mind. Certain stats displayed his virility and even indicated he was pure of heart, something that made no sense to Willie. At that moment, he didn't understand why the list showed that information until the thought became a certainty upon reading the words Ost's supporting role. This left our protagonist quite shocked. In addition to seeing his name, Willie, in the status panel, he also noticed the abundance of beautiful girls in this world. Suddenly, the answer dawned on him. He was in a world that seemed like a Christian webtoon, much like the ones shared on this YouTube channel. However, this series was called Inside the Store, a Christian story, a long-running Christian-themed harem university webtoon. It was a popular series that had held the top spot on the Webtoon platform for a long time. Although its ratings had recently dropped due to the story's length, Willie thought it was common for a webtoon protagonist to take over a fictional character's body but doubted his current role as a male supporting character, especially in a comic with religious themes. He basically felt like one of the least important characters. However, the good news was that he didn't have to worry about dying. This seemed great to him, as he understood that he was inside a Christian webtoon where the entire world knew what happened in these comics. Just then, he noticed a girl with a butterfly hair clip and a unique fashion style. Recognizing her as Leah, one of the heroines of the series, Willie blushed upon seeing how beautiful she was in person. He understood why the male protagonist always got so nervous around her. The girl noticed Willie's presence and greeted him, commenting that it had been a while. This left him so surprised that, for a moment, he was speechless. He couldn't believe that such a beautiful girl, almost like a celebrity, was greeting him. He even felt his face burn with embarrassment. Nevertheless, he nervously responded. Leah, curious, asked why it had been so hard to see him lately and if he would join the club more often. Willie promised he would, even though he felt like he was talking to a Christian movie star, which made him even more nervous, especially because, while looking at her, he could see her status panel. He asked where she was going. She mentioned she had the same class as him, something he didn't remember, though he never paid attention to such details in the webtoon. In the university classroom, Willie sat near Leah, occasionally glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. He kept reminding himself that he had become a character in a Christian comic he used to read. He knew everything about the characters and their stories, including Leah, even how she acted during masses. He could approach her if he wanted to, but when Leah looked at him, he quickly shifted his attention to his computer, lost in his thoughts. Willie doubted if that would be allowed until he asked himself a question. What man wouldn't want to be in his place? But he also knew that if he got too close, he might alter the story and risk taking the girl away from the protagonist. In the story, the protagonist loses the girl to another character, and that was one of the plot lines he liked the least, so he gave up on that idea. After 2 hours, the class finally ended, something Willie was grateful for as it seemed endless. At that moment, Leah approached him to invite him to dinner, which surprised him since he didn't understand why she had invited him, especially because he didn't remember this happening in the original plot. Although Leah was kind and often invited her friends to dinner, for her, it wasn't something particularly meaningful. Nervously, Willie replied that he already had other plans and apologized. Leah understood and suggested meeting next time, to which he agreed, promising to see her at the club. They both went their separate ways, and Willie felt confident he had made the right decision since he didn't want to be the guy who stole other people's girlfriends. He knew that Leah and the protagonist, Hero, had not yet had their mass, and since he was familiar with how the story would unfold, he felt the world wasn't lacking in girls, so he didn't see the need to steal the attention of others. Despite everything, he was glad to have a new opportunity to enjoy university life, something he couldn't do in the real world, and at least here, he wasn't in any danger. However, he soon realized his mistake. His will had no weight in this world. At that moment, the status panel appeared with an alert message indicating a change in his current role, which intrigued Willie. Upon checking, the system notified him that his category had been downgraded because his importance in the story had diminished, demoting him to an extra. Willie didn't quite understand what this meant and wanted to investigate more about his downgrade. The system then warned him that he would be removed from the story if he didn't manage to become a supporting character within the time limit. This finally made him realize that his life was at stake. The situation was solely due to having rejected a simple dinner invitation. The protagonist of this story then tells us how he ended up in this world. He was distracted by his phone when suddenly Truck-kun sent him straight to an Isekai. Upon waking, he realized he had become a supporting character in a religious webtoon he used to read in his past life. By the way, it seems the original translation of his name is Park Ganji, not Willie Park. Discovering this, he decided to avoid any NTR situations and enjoy his new life. However, a pop-up window warned him that if he didn't ascend to a supporting character within the time limit, his existence would be erased. From that moment, he understood that his desires didn't really matter. Upon reading the message, Ganji was incredulous and didn't know if it would really happen. He thought it was all punishment for rejecting a meal with Leah. He also suspected he had been demoted from a supporting character to an extra due to his lack of presence, Now he was determined to figure out how to gain more notoriety. Although worried, he asked his system for help to know what he should do. Immediately, a new window appeared, explaining that completing missions would grant him a significant amount of presence, allowing him to ascend. Although he didn't entirely understand what that meant, a new mission arose. He had to see the underwear of one of the main protagonists. This left him completely red-faced, as he hadn't expected it. His nervousness increased since he couldn't understand why they were asking something like that of him. He supposed it was because he was in a religious-themed webtoon. While pondering what to do, he accidentally bumped into a girl passing by. Turning to apologize, she, visibly annoyed, scolded him for not being more careful. It turned out to be Rachel, or as they renamed her, No Jew. She was 21 years old and one of the main protagonists. Noticing she had seen him before, she asked if he belonged to her club, although she couldn't remember his name since he was the new guy. He reminded her, Park Ganji. She nodded, mentioning that the name suited him, but warned him to be more careful, forgiving him because she was his superior. Gonji tells us that Ju is one of the key protagonists in the plot of Inside the Store. Although he thought he had been standing still and that it was she who bumped into him, he knew she had a strong character. Nevertheless, as for her appearance, he rated her as 1% less beautiful than Idel. He recognized that she was the protagonist many readers had been waiting to see in action. Then he remembered his mission. It wasn't necessary for the protagonist to be the main one since Ju was also a protagonist. Besides, completing the mission would be easier with her since she wore a skirt, making an accident more feasible compared to someone wearing pants. However, if something went wrong, he could get arrested, and if he ended up in prison, he wouldn't see any protagonist, which would mean his certain disappearance. With only 55 minutes left, he couldn't just stand around. He had to find the main girl. Later, we see Gonji going out to eat with Lee. When he found her, he ran back and lied, saying his plans had changed at the last minute. Lee, one of the webtoon's protagonists and a fan of Taiki, blushed. Gonji noticed that Lee's expression as she waited for the food was incredibly adorable. He never imagined being there, eating with such a beautiful girl. He even joked about how she seemed to be drooling in anticipation, something Lee described as torture while watching the bubbling, delicious food. Meanwhile, Gonji couldn't stop thinking about the mission. Although he was in a religious webtoon, he wondered if everything he was living through had any meaning for the story. Moreover, Lei looked adorable in her outfit. Gonji knew that completing the mission would be practically impossible. How could he achieve something like that in a Tebow Kiki restaurant? There was nothing he could do while her greatest shield, or rather her pants, was in front of him. The only thing he could hope for was that she herself would take them off. As he watched her eat, she seemed so charming and calm that he was grateful she couldn't read his thoughts. Lai noticed that he was staring at her and, concerned, asked if something was wrong. Gonji lied, assuring her it was nothing. When they finished eating, they both left the restaurant. To him, it was a defeat. He hadn't achieved anything during the meal. Lai commented on how delicious the restaurant had been and asked him if he was going to the club. Gonji, with no other choice, said yes, though in his mind, he only wanted to complete his mission as soon as possible. That afternoon at the photography club, Gonji knew things were going from bad to worse. Being alone with Lee was pleasant, but he didn't know how to complete his mission if her outfit wasn't helping him at all. With less than 7 minutes remaining, he had to decide quickly. He could try with Lee or another protagonist. Suddenly, he came up with a plan. He flung his headphones far away, as if they had accidentally slipped from his hand. Lai, always kind, offered to pick them up, laughing at how far they had gone. With a sarcastic smile, Gonji commented that he had more finger strength than he imagined. Although internally he apologized, he had no other choice. He needed to complete the mission to survive. All he needed was to see a simple line, and that would suffice. Internally, he begged for Lai to give him some chance, but he began to get nervous when he didn't see anything. He wondered if he needed to get a little closer, but even then, he couldn't achieve his goal. Confused, he thought that maybe Lai wasn't wearing anything, or perhaps fate simply wasn't on his side. He knew that, based on her personality, Lai didn't have unusual tastes, but he still began to doubt whether she was wearing anything. Just as Lai was about to say something to him, the door suddenly opened. Gonji was intrigued to see Ju entering while looking at her phone, unaware that Lee was crouched right in front of her. Lai turned and shouted, but it was too late. Both collided, causing Ju to stumble. For Gonji, this meant a new and possibly final opportunity. However, just as he was about to discover what he needed, a restricted access window appeared, indicating that this cache was reserved for main characters only. This left Gonji confused. He didn't understand why this was happening to him, especially why that window had emerged out of nowhere. After a loud crash in the room, Ju was on the floor. in pain. Ganji began to doubt if everything he was experiencing was because the webtoon didn't recognize him as a protagonist. Even though Ju had fallen, she managed to hold on to her skirt, which didn't make much sense to him. Meanwhile, Lee, recovering from the pain of the fall, remembered her friend and quickly went to check if she was okay or had gotten hurt. Ju, instead of worrying about herself, asked Lee to help her get up first, extending her hand. Upon observing Ju's leg, Lee noticed a bit of blood, which worried her greatly and sent her into a panic. Although Ju tried to reassure her by saying she only felt a slight itch, Lee insisted on finding something to clean the wound, concerned that it might leave a scar if not properly disinfected. She ran out of the room. Ganji still wondered if Ju was really okay. At that moment, he remembered he had missed the opportunity to complete his mission, and that, not being the protagonist, he couldn't live through a cliché event. He knew that if he didn't act soon, he might disappear. Then he remembered that the girl was also hurt, and noticed that despite the pain, she acted as if she didn't feel it. This reminded him of Ju's proud and stubborn nature, though deep down, he knew she was more sensitive than she appeared. Ganji tried to recall a similar situation from a previous episode he had read. Suddenly, he had an idea and asked Ju for a moment. He searched around the room, remembering that in one of the episodes, a character got hurt in the clubroom. He found what he needed, a first aid kit. He asked Ju to stay still while he cleaned her wound. Although she pretended to be fine, he reminded her that, as Lee had said, it could leave a scar. Ganji tried to help her, though he noticed that Ju continued to act strong and unbreakable. When she joked that she'd hit him if it hurt, Ganji realized that deep down, she just wanted to be cared for. He prepared to help her, though he also thought this situation might serve to complete his mission. As Ju turned around, he thought she wouldn't notice if he took a glance. Meanwhile, the girl wondered what he was doing, as he wasn't making any obvious moves. Suddenly, a sting ran down her leg, and Ganji warned her it might hurt a bit, asking her to bear with it, something Ju found difficult to do. Ganji reflected on the situation and focused on cleaning Ju's wound. Although she tried to act like it didn't hurt, her expression betrayed her every time he dabbed the cotton. Finally, he finished cleaning the wound and was about to apply the bandages. Although he felt somewhat embarrassed, he thought that maybe this was his last chance to complete the mission. However, he quickly dismissed the idea, as his only goal was to survive. All he had to do was lift his gaze, and that would be it, especially because he didn't have much time left and had to make a tough decision. In the end, Ju appeared calmer, as Ganji had done a good job. Ganji recommended that she not walk while looking at her phone to avoid accidents, basing his advice on his own experience. But as he said this, he wondered if he had gone crazy, especially because he sounded like an idiot. Ju got annoyed, thinking he was lecturing her. Ganji, confused, clarified that he only wanted her to be careful. However, Ju shouted that this was exactly what she meant. He was blaming her. Ganji honestly admitted that part of the blame was his, which made Ju even angrier. She argued that if anyone was to blame, Lee also had responsibility for crouching near the door. Ganji explained that Lee was there because she was helping him pick up his headphones and that Ju should have been paying attention when entering. He even reminded her that she had bumped into him earlier that afternoon because she was distracted by her phone. This only infuriated Ju further, as she felt accused. Ganji reaffirmed that, in that instance, he apologized out of courtesy, but in reality the fault was hers. Angrily, Ju insinuated that if he wanted her to get hurt to feel better, then he had succeeded. Ganji denied this, but Ju accused him of acting as if he were better than her and being mean. He tried to clarify that this wasn't his intention, but Ju interrupted him. Now she could get a good look at what he wanted, pointing out that he hadn't taken his eyes off her skirt and that if he thought she hadn't noticed, he was wrong. She called him a pervert, sarcastically remarking that thankfully, she was wearing shorts under her skirt. With a mix of irony and defiance, she told him to take a good look so he could feel better about himself. Ganji, confused, didn't understand what she meant until he noticed that his timer had stopped at 3 minutes. With this, we finished the first part of this manhwa. The truth is that it has very few chapters, so if I see a lot of support or if they release more chapters, I will bring it back. Remember, if you liked the video, leave a nice like, subscribe, activate the bell, and share with all your friends. Comment to let me know your opinions, and I hope you have a good afternoon. See you in the next video.